Welcome to a new episode of Delphine Circle, where we uncover the mind, body, and spirit of success. Subscribe now for free to receive updates on the latest interviews. Then, sit back, relax, and tune in. Welcome to the Circle, Jim.
I'm glad to be here.
So happy to have you. Jim Palmer, Baseball Hall of Famer. You're considered one of the best pitchers in baseball history. Now, I don't know a lot about baseball, but I do know what best means. So how did you become the best?
How did I become the best? Well, actually, I was born in New York and adopted. My dad passed away. He was in the dress business. My mom had come from, he was Jewish. My mom was Catholic. She came to New York to put her youngest brother through Juilliard School of Music. So he went on to play with Tommy Dorsey's band and met my dad, adopted my sister, who was 18 months older than I was, Bonnie, and then adopted me in 1945. And I never really played sports. I went to camp in the summer. I used to go up to Massachusetts.
I heard it was the butler that taught you how to throw a ball.
No. But George, well, we had people that lived with us, George and Ruth, and then when my mother would be mad at them, then we had another couple that would come in until my mom realized how good George and Ruth were. But they had their own quarters, and they had a little farm across the George Washington Bridge. So they would, they didn't work 7 days a week. They'd have days off and all that. So they'd go home and so on, whatever. But if I needed somebody to play catch, I always had George to go in the backyard. But not until my dad passed away, I was just turned 10, and we moved out to Whittier, California for a year. If you're from, New York, Manhattan, and then Rye and Harrison, Whittier in 1955 was pretty rural. So my mom lasted there 1 year, and we moved to Beverly Hills. And when I was actually in Whittier, I played in the Golden State League. I played third base. I hit about 180, which is not very good. Got to pitch a little bit. But I was always doing something, When
did you know you were really good?
Well, I was good in Little League, and I was good in Pony League. And I went to high school, moved to Arizona, went to Scottsdale, and probably the first time as far as baseball. I was an all-state basketball and football player. But when I was a freshman, I made the varsity team towards the end of the year, and we went over to a rival, Arcadia High School in Scottsdale. And there was a senior left-handed pitcher, and the scouts, for the first time, there were scouts there watching him. And I kind of got on the radar. So I went from there to Babe Ruth League, because I'm 14, played Babe Ruth 14 and 15, American Legion 1 year. And then, I was one of I think a typical kid, maybe a little bit different than now, where you get a coach now, they want you to play travel baseball, travel football, whatever. Back then, whatever the season was, that's the sport I was playing. So Scottsdale, have high skies. We come right out of basketball. We go to the state tournament, and then next thing you know, you're trying to find balls in the middle of the high sky. So I just went from one to the other, and had all kinds of college scholarships, UCLA to play basketball. Dodgers wanted me to go to SC for a year and then sign with them. And when I got out of high school, I was like 10-0 with 5 no-hitters. I got offered the scouts said, "You're going to get a lot of money." Well, they offered me like $15,000 or $20,000. And I just thought education was more important. I loved basketball because I had to work at it a little bit harder. And I went up to a college league up in South Dakota with 4 other guys from Arizona State. And I was the only high school player. It happened to be sponsored by the Orioles. I did really well against the best college players in the country at age 17. And all of a sudden, I got on the radar again. Yeah. And when I came back, I ended up signing at age 17, 1 year in A-ball and in the big leagues when I was 19.
The rest is history, as they say, huh?
Well, it is, yeah. Obviously, it's kind of interesting. And, people, I think, if you go to college and I went to high school and got a good education. I think I was 8th in my class. Now, the other 7 guys were the really smart guys, so I think I picked the right subjects. But I think you're always trying to figure out what you're going to do. And, for me, it was pretty easy because sports came natural. Yeah. If I hadn't played baseball, I don't know if I would have played in the NBA, but I would have worked hard. But I also had good coaches. It's kind of like, and I think back of, whether I signed with the Orioles or getting a good education, being adopted and having parents really tell me how important it was to get a good education and then be there for you. I mean, my parents took me, when I had a paper route in Beverly Hills, my mom, I would sit in the back of the station wagon on the days I had to play Little League, and I'd be firing papers just to make sure, and other guys would be coming in with their butlers and all that kind of stuff. So I had parents who were very supportive.
Yeah, that's awesome. During your 19-year career with the Baltimore Orioles, you won 6 spots on All-Star teams. You won 3 World Series rings. That's correct, right?
3 out of 6.
Won 3 Cy Young Awards and led the league in ERA twice and in wins 3 times. When you think back, over the years, like personally, what are the areas that really stand out for you? What are your highlights?
That I picked the Orioles. I signed a year before the draft. You have a draft in football and basketball and baseball. Started in 1965, I believe. So I signed in 64. I could have signed with any team. But my parents, they seemed that the Orioles were the right people. Mm. So in retrospect, 1 year in the minor leagues for Cal Ripken Sr., whose son went on to go to the Hall of Fame, played 2,632 consecutive games. Mm. Imagine that. I mean, the season's 162 games. Broke Babe, Lou Gehrig's record. So I had his dad as a coach, and he it's pretty simple. I still remember you have to understand what minor league baseball is about. I made $2,049 that year, and we used to make $500 a month. That's the most you could make. After taxes, you'd get about $414. You live in basement. If it rained in Aberdeen, South Dakota, it would usually flood. So your shoes would float over the corners. We didn't have a mirror in the bathroom, so you'd have to go into starting to shave at age 18. But when I played for Cal, I still remember the first meeting. He said, first of all, the only reason we're here is because of the people that are going to come see us play. So I don't care what line of business you're in. If you sell cars, who are you trying to cater to? The people that come in and buy cars. Baseball is no different. So I did that, and he said, listen, we're going to come to the ballpark and try to get a little bit better every day. And I said, I'm sitting there at 18, and I'm going, okay. And he said, then we're going to have fun. And he said, in baseball, that means you're going to win. And we're going to do it together because we all want to get to the next level. I was in A-ball, so you have A, AA, AAA, then the big leagues. So we're a long way in Aberdeen, South Dakota. And the other thing, and probably the most important thing, is work ethic. He said, we're never, as a team, going to let anybody outwork it. So I think I'd already kind of bought into that because for some reason in high school, I'd come home. My mom wasn't a great cook, but I'd help her cook. I'd do the dishes, do my homework, and then I'd go run a couple of miles. Even though I had just come from batting practice or basketball practice or whatever. So here's Cal telling us never let anybody outwork you. And probably the most important thing, and think about this, there are no such things as shortcuts. Yeah. How many times in our lives, there's a process pretty much to everything I think we do to be successful. And to hear that at age 18 and never forget that. And, they used to always talk about the Oriole way because I happened to pick a franchise for the 20 years I played there, had the best winning percentage in baseball. As you mentioned, we did get in 6 World Series. We won half of those, but we won more games than any other team from a percentage. And I think a lot of that had to do with the way we were taught in the minor leagues. That's incredible. Now, is that normal that somebody stays with the same team their whole career? I mean, how common is that? Why did you never make a move? Well, back then, I think it was a little bit more, it was probably going to happen a little bit more back then because you didn't have free agency. When I signed, you were with that team forever. I signed in 64, first year in the big league, 65, didn't have free agency until 1976. Now, by that time, we'd already gone to the World Series in 66, 69, 70, 71. We're in the playoffs. You'd be silly to leave now. Right, exactly. We're in the playoffs in 73 and 74 to the A's who won the World Championship. So we were good. They were just a little bit better. Yeah. And also, I had gotten married at 18. I had 2 daughters. You're raising your kids in Baltimore. My first house was $26,200. That's the most I could afford. There was a brand new house for $28,250, and I couldn't afford that. It wasn't a prudent thing to do because I didn't know how long I was going to play. So I think when you start having a chance to maybe go to New York where, maybe you can make a little bit more money, but you have to uproot your family. The education process in Maryland, Baltimore County had great schools. My girls would end up going to a couple of private schools later on. So, I just didn't want to do what I thought would be selfish just to make a few dollars, which is kind of how I got into underwear because, you were looking for other ways to make more income. And I used to speak for IBM, and Keith Morris used to he headed the Speakers Bureau, and he said, hey, instead of the speech for IBM, we want you to come up to New York and do an underwear ad for Jockey. And I said, well, how much does it pay? He said, more than a speech. I said, well, I should hope so. So in 1977, I actually became one of 9 players from all different walks of sports. And it was take away the uniforms and what do you have? So I guess that's probably why I was able to, make enough money to be able to support my family. And meanwhile, I'm still playing on one of the best teams in baseball, which was the Orioles.
Yeah. So what was that like to all of a sudden be cast into the limelight as an international sex symbol?
Well, I was actually, there was 9 of us, and I was the middle guy in the 3rd row. But you have to understand.
When anybody thinks about the Jockey ads, everybody knows that was Jim Palmer.
It would evolve to, 1980. So I started in 77, and I did the ads in 77, 1 and 9. I mean, Steve Carlton, Steve Garvey was in it. You had Kenny Anderson, a football player. You had JoJo White, who was a basketball player for the Celtics. You had guys from all different sports. I did it again in 1978, where it was actually kind of strobe photography, where it was actually throwing. They didn't use anybody in 79 other than a model that looked a lot better than I did. But I'd already done some dinners and speeches and appearances for them. So they came back to me and they said, we want you to be the singular spokesperson in 1980. And that lasted all the way to 1996.
Whoa.
But it wasn't just the underwear. I mean, I did store appearances. A typical day for Jockey, I would go into a city. I do radio at maybe 7 o'clock, maybe television, the morning shows, more radio, do a store appearance, go to lunch with the buyers and the people from Macy's or whatever it may be, Bloomingdale's, and, do the autograph thing for an hour, hour and a half. People would bring baseball memorabilia, but also, they did a poster because it was the same time as Farrah Fawcett. So and I said, listen, I do not want to do an underwear poster unless it's for a good cause.
Yeah.
So I had done a lot of fundraising for cystic fibrosis. So we actually gave the money to cystic fibrosis. I had a good friend that had 2 children that had CF, and
so the women got the posters and cystic fibrosis.
Well,
got the money.
It's been what town you were in. So if we were in San Francisco, I mean, there was equal opportunity.
Okay.
We were into equity back then.
Yeah. So another record you broke is you're the only pitcher in history that played in the World Series in 3 different decades.
No, 1 game's in 3 different decades.
1 game. 1 game.
Well, my World Series distinctions, again, I played in 6, we won 3. We beat the Dodgers, which was kind of an upset. I think it even surprised us in 1966. We won 4 in a row. And I pitched game 2 against Sandy Koufax, who was the best pitcher of that decade, Hall of Famer. I mean, marvelous pitcher. It was his last game. He was 30, I was 20. And we won that game, and then we won the last 2 games, 1-0, 1-0. So I won a game in 66, won a game in 70. And then on my 38th birthday, came in relief in Philadelphia and won a game, pitched a couple of innings, scoreless innings, and ball went through the shortstop's legs, and I became the only pitcher in the history of the game to win a World Series game in 3 different decades. The shutout, it's kind of funny how fate is. People say, well, how did you win, big games? What was the, I said, nothing different. My first win in the World Series, 66, was also my first shutout in my career.
Yeah.
And it just happened to be in a World Series, happened to be against the best pitcher in baseball at the time, Sandy Koufax, just happened to be against the Dodgers, who had won the World Series in 65.
Well, and you talk about that. You talk about that in your book, 9 Innings to Success, a Hall of Famer's Approach to Achieving Excellence. Can I read a quote that you said about that day?
I guess, yeah.
You said, I didn't have any trouble sleeping the night before the game. Here you're 20 years old. Despite the enormity of the situation, I felt an inner calmness. The whole thing had a surreal quality to it. I wanted to enjoy the experience and not be stressed out about it. I mean, these days they would call that presence, right?
Well,
where did you learn that from?
Well, when I got to the big leagues, I was 19, and back then you actually had roommates. It was a whole different financial structure in baseball. The most you can make your first year in the big leagues was $7,000. So I roomed with a guy named Robin Roberts. And Robin Roberts had 270 wins on his way to Cooperstown, one of the great pitchers of all time. And he was my roommate. He was twice my age. I mean, I would ask him questions. He would answer them. He mentored me. He was 38. I was 19. And he would finally, about 1 o'clock, we watched the Tonight Show. Johnny Carson was the greatest. You'd say, I want to just watch the monologue. And then later it's 1 o'clock. He says, kid, I got to get my rest. I'm 38 years old. So Robin kind of taught me how to pitch. He was only there about 2.5 months because he was trying to win 300 games. So it turned out he ended up with 286. So we had a very veteran team. So, and the other thing is, to be quite honest, I just didn't want to embarrass myself. And I think if you talk to any professional player or even somebody now, normally when you're a good athlete, you always end up playing with the big kids. When I went to camp, the only time I ever caught was when I went to Camp Half Moon up in Massachusetts, and I was 9 years old, and I went down to see the big kids play, and they said, well, we need a catcher. What a horrible position. I did it once because I was 9 and I wanted to play. And then when you're playing Little League, you get there at 10, and then, you get 12-year-old kids. So you figure out, well, what do I have to do? And then you go to high school and you're a freshman. What's the varsity doing? Because I got to play varsity basketball when I was a freshman. I got to play varsity baseball. So you had to figure it out because they're, 2-3 years older, and they're smarter and they're more mature and all that. So you kind of, and then when I played Babe Ruth, like we went all over, we went to Utah once, we went to Hawaii to represent Arizona. So you're trying to figure it out on the fly. And, that I just wanted to have a good game. And as it turned out, I pitched, arguably the best game of my career. It's just, and you did it on a big stage, but I didn't do anything differently. I just went out there and tried to compete.
Do you think that the way that they used to do it, where salaries were kind of locked, everybody kind of made the same amount of money, you all kind of advanced at the same pace, do you think that that's the better way to do it? Or do you think that the way that they do it now is the way it
the
needs
great
to be?
thing about baseball is you have a union. In fact, we have a lockout now. I mean, the baseball players have been locked out by the owners because they're trying to negotiate a pact that comes up the CBA that comes up every 4 or 5 years. We didn't have a union when I started. Now, union kind of started, but not as strong as it is now, 1966. But the great thing about baseball, you have a pension, you have meal money, you have certain rights that are negotiated as a union, but you individually get to negotiate your salary. Not too many industries allow you to do that. So you're protected by your union, but then, and we, the young players are now, they're saying, well, we don't get paid enough early on. Well, we never got paid enough ever. So there's a lot of money in baseball now. But the great thing about baseball was, there was kind of a standard pay scale. I was lucky enough to win 20 games 8 out of 9 years, which is quite a run. Every year that I win 20 games, I get a $15,000 raise. Now, nowadays, they laugh. They go, geez, that's nothing. And if I won a Cy Young Award, which is the record or the award they give for the best pitcher that year, not if you finish second, you get maybe an extra $5,000. So it was a great, incentive or impetus to do well. I had a long-term deal. Yeah. But all the deals I had early on, if you won 20 games, you'd start the next year, they'd take the 20 games away. Yeah. You start out 0-0. And I think for anybody that's in any business, again, going back to what Cal Ripken Sr. told us, it's like owning a restaurant. You're only as good as your next meal. Yeah. And all you got to do is look in the mirror and you kind of tell how you're doing in baseball. It's a very black and white business, which I think is good, contrary to what I do now, which is broadcasting. Broadcasting, I work with Howard Cosell, who was a very controversial guy. People either loved or hated Howard, but baseball was black and white. If you win 20 games, you had a great year. If you win 15 now, you're a superstar. Back then, you're going, well, he's not as good as he was last year. So there were always maybe these internal and external numbers, analytics that you had to try to meet. And, to me, that was the great thing about baseball is they'd always take it away. And then, you'd be very happy about the season you had, and then you would have to build it again. It was like building a house. You'd have to start that same foundation the next year.
Yep, absolutely. So I told you my brother-in-law is Damon Berryhill, and he was manager in the Dodgers organization and the Braves organization. And he told a funny story. He said that he preferred being the manager of the single A team than the triple A team. Because the AAA team, he says, you don't have a team. You have guys trying to get out of there to go up, and you guys really upset that they came down. And I had never really thought about that, but ego is a big part of the game, right?
Well, it is. I mean, you want to feel good about yourself. But there's a term in baseball called 4A players. Mm-hmm. AAA, 4A. Yeah. 4A is somewhere kind of in limbo between AAA. You're probably too good for AAA, and you're good enough to play in the big leagues, but you're maybe not good enough to stay there, or maybe you're not on the right team. The minimum salary in baseball, they're trying to raise it. It's a lot more than I made, but then it's a long time ago when I played. It's like $570,000. But if you're playing in AAA, you may make $15,000, $20,000 a year, maybe a little bit more if you're, a prospect. But if you go to the big leagues, all of a sudden that salary jumps up. So obviously guys want to play in the big leagues. But he makes a really good point. In A-ball, maybe the expectations aren't as high. But also just try to imagine you're managing AAA and, you're trying to win because that's what you're getting paid for. But your players are going back and forth. The Orioles used 62 players last year. Oh. And you have a 26-man roster. So, and that was all the way between AAA and AA. So if you're a AAA manager who no longer has his job because they didn't play very well in the big league level, it's a pretty difficult thing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You were elected to the Baseball Hall of Fame in 1990. It was the very first year you were eligible, and you received 93% of the 444 ballots cast by the Baseball Writers Association. They really wanted you in that Baseball Hall of Fame.
The writers apparently did.
What did that induction mean to you?
I think it was January 9th, 1990. He said, I can't tell you got in, but you did win more games, 187 games in the 70s than anybody other. You did win 3 Cy Youngs. You did win 20 games 8 times. Got the 4th lowest ERA of all times. You were successful in the World Series. He goes down the whole list. But I can't tell you you're getting in. So we'll call you between 7 and 8 o'clock. 8 o'clock comes, no phone call. 8:15 comes, no phone call. And I was married to my second wife, and PJ, my stepson, says, Jim, it's not looking very good. Now it's about 8:30. And finally, the phone rings at about 20 to 9, and it's Jack Lang. And he goes, I have good news and I have bad news. And I said, well, what's the good news? He said, well, 411 writers voted for you, and 33 didn't. So welcome to the Hall of Fame. But it could have been about an hour and a half earlier. So and I don't think you really know what it's like to be in the Hall of Fame. I mean, until you actually go there. I mean, Cooperstown is a beautiful city in upstate New York. It's on the, Lake Oswego, which is the mouth of the Susquehanna River. It's about a 9-mile lake, and it's idyllic. I mean, it's like you're going back in time. And that's where they have the Hall of Fame Museum. So, went up, did Good Morning America the next day, but not until I actually went for the induction weekend. And Joe Morgan and I got in 1990. Joe passed away a couple of years ago, and one of the great players, a couple of MVPs. So it was quite an honor to go in with him. But until you go up there, and we got rained out. We were the only induction that ever got rained out on Sunday, and then we did it in a little gym, 1,000 people versus maybe 15, 20,000 people out on the grass field, in Cooperstown. So that night, normally you would have a dinner where they give you the Hall of Fame rings, and now you got to understand. I when I was born in New York, my dad took me to Yankee Stadium when I was 9.5, and it was before color television, and I never realized how green the grass was. And now here I am in Cooperstown. I'm going to, get inducted. Now it turns out the following day. It should have already happened. And you go to the dinner. You got Joe DiMaggio. You have Mickey Mill. You have Sandy Koufax. You have Ted Williams. You have Stan Musial. You have Willie Mays. You have the greatest players that ever played in maybe the last 2 generations. And guys that I used to have their baseball cards. guys, I used to run down in the morning to, it used to be, now it's the Daily News, but the Daily Mirror. Yanks sweep too. I love the Yankees. Yogi Berra's there, and Whitey Ford, and Phil Rizzuto. I mean, all these players that I just idolized. And, and now I've got to come up with a speech the next day, and Ted Williams grabs the microphone, and Stan Musial had some health issues. And he says, he goes, Stan, it's so great to have you back. Now, this is Stan, the man, Musial, who got 3,630 hits, 1,815 at home, 1,815 on the road. If he didn't get a home run rained out, would have led the National League in hits, singles, doubles, triples, home runs, RBIs, runs scored, except he tied with a home run lead. This is how, These are the guys sitting behind me.
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden, you're going to be part of that club. But until that moment, the Hall of Fame, it's great. It's the Hall of Fame. But until you go there and you know that it's a small fraternity. And I think the other thing is, I've been now involved in baseball since, really little, so age 10. And when you go to the induction and you see people come to Cooperstown that love baseball, love it. Yeah, they love their team. They come for the induction, but they just come because of their love affair with baseball. Mm-hmm. So, when we have lockouts and we have strikes and, we have pandemics and people can't enjoy the game, I think you really get in touch when you happen to be in the Hall of Fame. But, again, I play with so many other guys that got me there. It's not like, the game is only about the Hall of Famers, but it is a specialized group.
Absolutely, yeah. Do you, who's your favorite baseball player? Who do you idolize?
It was Mickey Mantle growing up. Mm-hmm. I used to have his glove, get his glove, put the ball in, put a belt around it, put it underneath your mattress, take, shaving cream from my dad because I didn't shave, and put it in there to soften it up. Yeah, I always wanted, I would end up being a pitcher, but in high school, until I got astigmatism my senior year, I was, one of the best hitters, and, I could play all kinds of different positions. I just love baseball. But I love basketball, and I love football, and I loved, a lot of other sports. Or tennis, or golf, mm-hmm. or, biking. I enjoy doing things that, that maybe kind of make you move.
When you look at how the game has changed since the time that you were a player until now, is there anything that you look at and you say, okay, this really bugs me. They're not doing this right, or I wish things would not be the same?
Well, I try not to do that as a broadcaster. I don't want to, live in the past. Kind of like football, when you, I was a wide receiver, when you caught a touchdown pass, and, I was an all-state end 2 years, and I caught homecoming, caught 4 touchdowns one day, and I didn't slam the ball down. I just dropped the ball. It was my job. So I can't imagine Robin Roberts, who taught me about pitching, when he struck a guy out, pointing at him or doing all that kind of stuff, mm-hmm. or doing all the kind of stuff. But I don't know. I if I was making $35 million a year, maybe I would gesture and do all that kind of stuff and all that. I just didn't. I always thought. Let me be honest. I threw real hard, and I was a high fastball pitcher, and some guys hit me and some didn't, and most of the guys, I had a lot of success. Now there's a term analytics say, your spin rate, how you make the ball spin. So Koufax, myself, Nolan Ryan, we could backspin the ball, and we had curveballs and sliders and changeups and all that kind of stuff. But a guy would pinch hit, and I'd throw him 2 fastballs, and he'd swing with the balls in the glove, and I'd go, gee, should I maybe let him hit the ball? And I'd go, the heck with that. So you were very competitive, but probably one of the best stories, and we talked about playing for the Orioles. When I was in Thomasville, Georgia, it was about 45 miles north of Tallahassee, right over the Georgia line. And we had maybe 200 players, all trying to make teams, and my number was like 218. I was a bonus kid, but nobody knew that. And they told us about not wearing our emotions on our sleeves. Not that you're not emotional, not that you're not prepared, not that you don't have a great work ethic, but we don't let people know what we're thinking. Now, I guess it's more entertaining, So if you strike somebody out, or if you hit a home run, I didn't throw it, guys. I think I hit 38 guys in 4,000 innings. I only maybe hit, hit guys on a couple of occasions and I never.
When they deserved it.
No, well, yeah, if they're hitting the ball off the corner outside, and so they don't think you're throwing at them when you hit them in the kneecap. So, 38 guys. So I didn't throw at guys, but I didn't. I think maybe I would have changed a little bit if guys were hitting home runs and pointing and doing all that stuff. I didn't show people up. My job was to get them out, and when I did, I had just done my job. So maybe that would be. You did
often.
Well, I did, but that might be one thing that I changed about the game. But I don't listen. I mean, I try to when I broadcast. It's their game. They're going to play the game they want. I still celebrate guys that are gifted, and I would like. I mean, I walked 130 and 129 innings, more than one inning. So I know when guys are having control problems, they're trying to throw it over and they can't. So you try to be empathetic, I think,
absolutely.
And maybe compassionate up in the booth.
You've been there. So we do a little something here called the big questions, and those were all easy ones. These are kind of designed to dig a little deeper, understand the Jim that we may not see on the broadcast television. Do you have any consistent daily routines?
Well, my wife says after I work out every day, which I do. I mean, we might take one day off a week. Typical day, I get up, make a protein shake, bring my wife a large vanilla chai tea.
Good husband.
A lot of sweetener. Take the dog, our little wide-haired dachshund, let him out. Have my protein shake. Then we, usually go to the gym.
What type of workout do you like to do?
I do, I have my knee replaced, which is the best thing I ever did because I put it off for 20 years. And finally, after about 18 years, I had it done after 20, but I should have had it done.
Can I tell you how many times I've heard people say that? A lot of guys put it off, women too, but I've had a lot of guy friends that have had it.
Have you ever looked at what they actually do?
Yeah, it's pretty gross.
Yeah,
right?
but except if you go to the right doctor. I went to a guy, Robert Gorab, out here, who did a bunch of my former teammates' hips, and everybody, all the PT guys, because I waited for my back and so on and so on. So, I won't run on the treadmill, but I row, I bike. Do rotator cuffs every other day, and my shoulder stuff. I do all kinds of stretching, all kinds of ab work.
Could you still model briefs?
The exercise, the stretching room at Shape Up is very dark, so probably we call it. So I have that kind of routine, and then, when you have a son with autism, Spencer, a lovely kid. He just turned 25, and he's way up on the spectrum, but he doesn't eat normal food. So part of his day is it's either Chili's. He'll only eat a certain kind of fries. He used to be Cheesecake Factory, but no longer. So it's either McDonald's or Chili's or because I guess the smell issues or whatever. And then he'll go walking with my wife Susan or me or whatever. He works out a couple days a week. Just have that kind of routine. And then, of course, during the baseball season, typical day is you're getting up and, it's kind of like pitching. There's a process to being ready for the game. So, you got to do your homework. Well, you don't have to, but I feel like you have to. Yeah. In case the game can't go 12 innings anymore because they changed the extra inning rules. But you want to be as prepared as you can. So, you read, you do your stuff, but still have time for the gym and, get on with your life.
Tell me something that people would be surprised to know about you.
Well, probably the adoption aspect. When I used to do speaking, I'd always say that I was adopted, and I kind of lucked out because I had great parents. And, number one, I was born in this country. The president of the Hall of Fame used to talk about the ovarian lottery, which is that you were born in the United States. So I had great parents. And Susan, my wife, she actually traced, 4 years ago, 2017, during the playoffs, which I was kind of watching, but she didn't want to watch any of it. She actually, went on 23andMe and some of the other things. And
what made her decide to do that?
Well, when I was adopted, my uncle, who had come to go to Juilliard School of Music, went with his sister, my mom, my adopted mom, and they went to a hospital in Manhattan, and the name on the birth certificate said Kennedy. So Uncle Bob always said,
You do kind of resemble the
I don't know
Kennedys.
about that. So you might be a Kennedy. And there's a great writer who writes for the Washington Post, Dave Sheinin, and we'd see him at the Hall of Fame, and we would go to dinner and all that. And he said, "Yeah, I'm going to try to do that." And he got to the point where I think the name on my birth certificate was Maroney. So Susan started kind of did my DNA and found out that my biological parents had immigrated probably in I was born in 1945, so they immigrated in maybe 28, 29 from Ireland. Joe Guerin was my biological dad. He was from, I think, County Leitrim. And my mom, Marianne Maroney, and was from County Clare. So they came to New York. She was unmarried. He had an affair. I guess she put me up for adoption. And so I think the fact that you're adopted, but, like I said, I was on Jesse Raphael, what was it? Jesse Raphael, what was her name?
Okay, yeah.
She had the talk show.
Yeah.
Yeah, and she did a show on adoption. And they had Dave Thomas, who started Wendy's, who was adopted. They had Faith Daniels, who did CBS, beautiful, about 6 months pregnant. She was sitting next to me. She did the CBS Good Morning Show. And they had a very angry Roger Grimsby, who was an ABC correspondent, who had gone back to see his real parents when he was 13 or 14. And they said, North Dakota said, we didn't want you then, we don't want you now.
Oh.
But I think the one thing I got out of that show was the fact that it's not your biological parents, it's your real parents that raise you.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why adoption is such a gift.
It is
not only for me, but for anybody.
Absolutely.
So I was very fortunate. So I think the adoption.
Tell me a piece of advice that you were given that really served you well.
I think the work ethic, the Cal Ripken Sr., who was, you got to understand, Cal Ripken Sr. was a guy that wanted to be a catcher. He's, Cal's 6'4", played all those games, 2,632 consecutive, Hall of Fame, over 400 home runs, 3,000 hits, Gold Gloves and all that. His dad hurt his shoulder and became a manager at like 28. So he was, I had him in A-ball, I had him in instructional league, and it kind of taught me baseball. But the work ethic and the fact, when somebody tells you there are no such things as shortcuts, and then you end up playing 20 years and you see how many talented people out there have had similar ability to you, yet they don't want to work as hard, or they did take shortcuts. I'm not saying that, that maybe I didn't cut off a corner every once in a while, but it was just, it's so much easier to look in the mirror and then when you lose a baseball game knowing, you know what, hey, I did everything I could do to win.
Right.
And you're going to lose because it's a team game and sometimes the other team's scores more runs or the other pitcher's better, or when you play in a World Series, like when we lost to the Mets or the Pirates, great series, the two Pirates series, 7 games, 71 and 79. I don't know if they outplayed us, but they won and they did it fair and square. And so I think, again, the fact that you do everything you can to win and you don't ever let anybody outwork you, and then you don't take the shortcuts. Probably the best advice I've ever had.
Yeah, well, that's great advice to everybody, I think, for sure.
And wear Jockey, of course.
And to wear Jockey.
Comfort.
Boxers or briefs.
Do you ever watch Seinfeld?
Yeah.
Yeah, more room for the boys when you wear
boxers.
Boxers, but I wear briefs.
There you go.
I've never been a boxer.
I'm sure Susan appreciates that.
I don't know about that.
What do you feel is the biggest issue facing our world today?
Well, the world. I suppose, it's funny, Susan's uncle went to MIT and Naval Academy, so every time they bring up global warming, he goes, so I can't go to global warming. Political unrest, the fact that we don't get along, especially in this country. It's funny, if you play on a baseball team, you have, now they have, we used to have 10 pitchers, now they have 13, 14. So you have your pitchers and then you have your catchers and your regular, your fielders and your outfielders. But you're a team. I get the feeling in this country, we're not a team anymore. No, the Democrats and the Republicans, they don't, regardless of what size you're, they just don't like each other and they have their own agendas. And, we used to have a saying in baseball, when we would and again, when you play on a team that had the best winning percentage, when we'd get a guy that would come over, we usually picked pretty good players, but you had Orioles on the front, and then you had your name on the back. And I'm not exaggerating. You could always tell when a player played on a losing team because they didn't really care much about this. They cared about their name on the back. You could always tell the difference between a winner or a loser because he played for the losers played for the name on their back because that was okay. And I feel like in this country now, it's okay, not to see what's best for this country. And it's very frustrating. Especially when, my daughters are in their 50s now, but, I have grandkids. Henry and Maxine are down in Texas, and, Spencer's only 25. You want the best for your kids. So hopefully we'll be able to get a little bit better. And I think the other thing, the pandemic taught us some great lessons about being, we were oil independent. And I remember years ago, my great grandmother said, you don't want to buy some stock that when some sheik in Saudi Arabia stands up and says we're cutting off the tap, that the market goes down or whatever the case is. Well, we kind of went from being oil independent to not being, and I think we're paying the price. And we learned that a lot of the things that we used to make, we no longer make. So we're more dependent on other countries. And sometimes other countries don't like us.
Yeah.
Big concern. We need to change that. Now, how we're going to do that?
Could you work on that for us? Well, that'll be interview number 2.
No. Let's go back to the Washington Press Club. I only want to be the mayor of Juno Beach. That's the only politics I want to get into.
Tell me something that you used to believe but you don't anymore.
Media. I saw it a little bit in baseball. You'd have writers come up to you. I was on the Phil Donahue show, and there was a guy named Milton Richmond. He wrote for the United AP, so he was all over the country. And he asked me a question in New York. I pitched against the Yankees at Yankee Stadium, and he goes, "Am I understanding what you say?" And I said, "Excuse me?" He said, "I've never had a writer say that." He said, "No, I just want to get it right. I want to know if what you're saying is the way it really was." So I go and I'm in Chicago and doing something for Jockey, and I did the Phil Donahue show, and he asked me, he said, ask me about writers. And I said, well, yeah, writers usually, they have preconceived notions about what they want to write. They don't always listen. They're already going on their tangent before, and they're going to take it out of context, and they're going to mold your words into what their storyline is. Kind of, and so, of course, Milton Richmond wrote me a little note saying, I don't watch Phil Donahue, but my friends do. Thank you so much, for saying nice things about me, and you probably know that I vote for the Hall of Fame. Wish I didn't, but I just said it because it was the first time it ever happened. Now you turn on television or you watch stuff and you go, okay, they say stuff they're not accountable for. You
don't know what to believe.
Yeah, right. And same with our laws. I thought we had laws because they were laws, but the definition of laws changed. And it's funny. When I played, and you're winning Cy Youngs and all that. You're the guy that's supposed to lead the band. You're supposed to be the orchestrate leader. And I had this love-hate relationship with Earl Weaver, my manager, and I wrote 2 books, the 9 Days of Success, but I wrote a book with Jim Dale called Together We Were 11'9", because I was 6'3" and Earl was 5'6". And we both ended up in the Hall of Fame. But I used to sit in the first row of bulkhead with a left-handed pitcher who did win 1 Cy Young, Mike Flanagan. And Mike told me a story. He says, I know you don't get along with Earl. You have this love-hate relationship. He puts the ball in your locker every 4 days. You win, but he never shakes your hand, and he doesn't want you to like him because then it will make his job harder and all that. But he said, you pitched 5 innings in spring training last year, and he called me over. It was my first year on the Major League roster in spring training in Miami, and he said, see that guy out there? He says, you do what he does, and you'll never have a problem in the big leagues. Now, that's the ultimate compliment for your manager to say, but Earl was never going to say that to me. So years later, Earl gets in the Hall of Fame, and it's the night before the induction, and we're going over to the museum in Cooperstown Earl's sitting with some friends having a couple of drinks, and he was closing in on 80, and I couldn't make fun of him anymore because he wasn't quite as sharp. So I said, Earl, I said, Mike Flanagan, I said, you really like me. You pretended you didn't like me all those years. But I said, no, Mike Flanagan told me what you told him about, just do what he does and, you'll never have a problem. He goes, I told them all that. So, here's a guy, Earl was telling me something and whatever, but you could kind of believe what was going on. But now I don't know what to believe. You just don't know, and so we have some work to do. And it just doesn't seem like it's getting any better.
Yeah. What goal have you yet to reach?
I don't know. That's a good point. When I was young, I did a lot of work with cystic fibrosis. Susan and I used to do a lot of fundraising for autism because, we kind of live in the world of autism with Spencer. It's, like I said, he's such a kind, gentle, smart, brilliant, photographic memory type of kid. So I certainly like to make a difference. And otherwise, I think it's amazing how people look up to you when, I always used to say, they say, you used to be one of the great, maybe you're one of the best pitchers ever, blah, blah, blah. And I go, yeah, tell them who I used to be. But you still are that person. So when you meet people, I had people that told me that, in the same amount of time it takes to be rude to somebody, you can be nice to them. So I think when you are who I am or just happen to be, I think you still have, I don't know, I guess, you still have to be kind to people and you have to be generous with your time and whatever. Now maybe you do it. It's amazing. The older you get, the more friends you lose. Just lost another sports editor. And it's amazing how you, by being nice to people in an airport or maybe a little bit harder now because we're all masked people. That's the great thing about being older. You get to wear a mask. Nobody knows how you look. Do you ever get the feeling we all could be?
I can go out without makeup on now.
Right, well, yeah, but we could be Larry David over the last 2 years. I don't know if you ever watched Curb Your Enthusiasm, but Larry David says whatever comes to his mind.
Yeah.
He's hysterical.
Yeah.
He wrote the Seinfeld stuff, but this has been 2 years where nobody really knows who you are when you have your mask on. But I think the fact that I don't know, maybe I'm going to keep broadcasting. I'm going to keep the Orioles are not a very good team, but the way the system is kind of tanking. They've got number one draft choices 2 out of the last 3 years. So they're trying to get better, and hopefully I'll still be there when they do, because it would be nice to be part of something that I was able to be part of.
Build, yeah, for sure. You've officially now been a broadcaster longer than you were a player, because you retired in '84, right?
Yes.
And you've been broadcasting for a long time now. What is it about broadcasting that you love?
Paycheck. I'm not going to make. No, it's a way to be involved in the game. I sat with a guy who was doing learning seminars, and I said, probably like 6, 7, 8 years ago, flying into West Palm Beach, and I said, so if I stop broadcasting, I'm 68 at the time, I said, how long for my brain to turn into a melon? He said, I give you about 18 months. That's all I had to hear. So, whether it's dementia or Alzheimer's, you have to keep using your brain. Yeah. And broadcasting makes me do that.
Oh, I love that.
And the other thing is, when you talk about that is, our owner once asked me, he bought the team, and he didn't like the manager. And I said, well, who are you going to get that's better? I never thought of that. He said, well, I listen to your broadcast, you know what's going to happen and all that. I said, Peter Angelos, I said, Peter, I'm undefeated. You don't lose a game up in the booth. Now, you do your homework, you do your preparation, but you're kind of you're like a mediator. You're more neutral. You're like Switzerland when you're up there. So it's not, if he wanted me to manage, the owner of the Orioles wanted me to manage, you get fired if you're man. It doesn't matter. I haven't got.
And you have to travel.
Well, you got to travel when you broadcast. Well, we did before the pandemic, but when you manage, you're going to get fired. Broadcasters nowadays, of course, you're always one sentence away from saying something that's going to get you canceled. So you got to be very careful. I have a Dawn DiAgostino's our woman producer. She used to do the Angels. She's fabulous. She's the best. Was as good as anybody. Knows baseball, whatever. She goes, Twitter, broadcasting. Can't count to 10 when you're broadcasting, but count to 10 before you put anything on your Twitter account.
Mm-hmm. Smart.
Take a deep breath.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
well, we couldn't wrap it up without talking a little bit about your beautiful wife. And you have 2 daughters as well, Jamie and Kelly.
Yeah, I do.
And now you have a stepson, Spencer, that you spend a lot of time with. Tell me about what is, after being and leading so many guys in baseball, what does that mean to be a dad to you?
When you're 20 or 19 in the big leagues, especially when you're 20 and you just had your first child going, what's it like to be a dad? You just kind of learn. So, but if you don't, I have to give a lot of credit to my first wife, Susan. Susan now, but Susie back then. It's a tough job. Didn't make a lot of money. Hurt my shoulder where I thought my career was over at age 22. Have to take pay cuts, go to the minor leagues. She's in Baltimore by herself. Married single, which is what a baseball player's wife. It's a little bit different now. If you're making, if you were good, you'd probably be making 20, 30, 40 million dollars in some cases. So it gives you a little bit of advantage. But, my girls, I wasn't with them enough. When in 1984, I did have a chance to go to New York, but I'd been away for 13 Kelly was 13 and Jamie was 15. I've been away their whole lives. It was too selfish.
Mm.
I was doing the underwear stuff for Jockey. I just signed a 4-year deal with ABC to broadcast. So I just figured, you know what? I won enough games. Been part of enough team events and World Series and things like that it was time to do them. When I did the underwear posters, I said, to Jamie, best wishes, your dad. So I don't. I know their friends and their peer group knew that I was Jim Palmer, but I think they handled it pretty well. Mm. Even though I will say this, Kelly got out of Baltimore very quickly and went to the University of Colorado. Mm. She wanted to get away from being Jim Palmer's daughter. But it's kind of interesting. I lost the last game in 1982. If when we win, we play the Angels for the American League Championship Series. And if I would have won another Cy Young, I would have. It was a big game. It was the worst loss I ever had. So I go off to broadcast, and some writer writes an article. Well, Jim Palmer didn't care. He's getting the broadcast for ABC, so the game didn't mean anything. And Kelly reads that in the paper. She's 13 years old and writes a letter to the editor. Now I don't see that. We come out here, we do 2 games, off day in Milwaukee. Friday, I'm getting ready to do an afternoon game, and one of the cameramen says, "Did you see the AP article or the UP article in the Chicago Sun-Times or whatever?" It was a letter to the editor that they had printed from Kelly to the writer. You don't know my dad. You don't know how much he cares about winning and whatever. Mm-hmm. So I guess I raised my kids up.
Yeah.
Okay, And then, Kelly's got twins, Maxine and Henry. And, Jamie married, she lived on the Cape since she got out of William Smith Hobart for probably 20-some years. She just moved down to Vero Beach. She married a state trooper he's good. He tried to get into Fenway Park with his gun. Didn't want to leave it in the car. That didn't go well with a metal detector.
Can imagine.
Yeah. So anyway, they're happy, they're healthy. That's important. Really the important thing.
Yeah.
And then Susan, I lucked out. I had a friend down in Palm Beach. I'd gone out with her daughter, and she said, "You need to meet the girl that owns the island home next door." So I walked in, and she would tell the story different. She said, "I don't know." She said she had back problems or something, or her hamstrings were tight, and I was teaching her how to stretch her hamstring. I was shy. I talked about my ex-girlfriend. I mean, the whole story. but she's brilliant.
Yes.
And, I think she loves me.
I think
and
so.
I lucked out.
Yeah. That's wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Jim. It's
been
a
you're
pleasure
welcome.
having you here. Thanks
my
for sharing
pleasure.
your stories.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Delphine Circle. Don't forget to subscribe. It's free and it will help us keep these incredible interviews coming your way. Here are 2 other episodes you may enjoy. I'm Delphine. Welcome to my circle.